Why the New Testament is our guide. One of the biggest questions I had as I was trying to reconcile everything in my mind, why when people would tell me to look for an answer, they would point me to this book? What makes it so special? You know, I had people tell me that it was authentic and it was important, but what makes it so special? That's when I got to looking into Josh McDowell stuff. This stuff is fantastic. This guy was an atheist too. As a matter of fact, all these books right here, all written by atheists trying to prove that God was not real. These were former atheists. This guy's a church historian. We'll talk a little bit more about his stuff at another time. But Josh McDowell, he says when you look at works of antiquity, if you want to know if they're authentic, he says you have to look at the timeline of when they were written to when we have the first copies, because it was written on papyrus. And that stuff just disintegrated. So it's like we can't say we have what Matthew wrote. We have copies of what Matthew wrote. And he says what makes things authentic is if you have a copy that is closely dated to when it was first written. And he compares the writings of the New Testament to things such as Homer. The works of Homer, the first copies we have on the works of Homer are 400 years from when he wrote it to when we actually have copies. Plato is 1,300 years. The works of Aristotle, the gap is 1,400 years, and for the New Testament, only 50 to 75 years, and as new discoveries are being made in new archaeological studies, it's more like 35 years. He said the second thing you need to see is how many copies do you have? How many copies? You know, I told you, sometimes it's just one line in an ancient document that will tell us about somebody of history, and it's just fantastic information. You know, and Christ is everywhere. But anyway, how many copies do you have? If you look at Homer's work, we have 643 copies. We have of Caesar's Gallic Wars, 10 copies. 10 copies for Caesar's works. Plato, 7 copies. Aristotle, 49 copies. And how many copies do you think we have of the New Testament? You see it right there on your paper. Just in the Greek manuscripts, we have 5,366, and that's just the Greek. We have so many different translations because the New Testament was written as a work of evangelism. So it was written in many different languages. If you look at the copies that we have, when you look at all the languages, we have 24,633. And they have 10 of Caesar. But, you know, can you argue? If you go to Vanderbilt and say, hey, Caesar didn't exist, they laugh you out of, you know. But it's like we have all this proof of Christ. And they think it's not valid. And there was another thing that Mr. McDowell made. He said that you could take and destroy everything we have of the New Testament writings. Destroy every bit of it. And it was so widely quoted among the people who were Christians that you could destroy everything we have, and you would be able to reconstruct everything in the New Testament with the exception of 11 verses within 150 to 250 years after Christ walked the earth, just by taking and pulling the verses from sermons that people wrote, or presentations that they wrote, or letters that they wrote. That's astounding. When you look at the proof of the documents of antiquity, nobody gets close to the Bible. Not even close. I wanted to talk to you too about the canon and stuff. Talking about the Bible. Why do we have these books? The reason why that we have the books we have is because of their close association to the apostles. There are some books that have, you know, some people will tell you, well, King James threw all the books out and stuff. That's not true. The canon as we know it, the list of books that we study, was available in the Muratorian canon by 190 AD, long before King James or the Reformations or the Crusades. We have a list of the books as we know them, with the exceptions of Hebrews, James, 1st and 2nd Peter, and 3rd John. So when people try to tell you that, well, there's a bunch of missing books and they threw out a bunch of stuff and this is not what you need to be studying, this is just the memoirs of the apostles. When the early Christians came together, they didn't say, hey, let's get out the New Testament. They said, let's get out the memoirs of the apostles. Let's get out the diaries of the apostles and see what they have to say. And what makes them valid is because they were eyewitnesses. Mr. McDowell makes another just profound point to me. He says, when you look at what the eyewitnesses wrote, he said they were martyred. All except John died in horrific ways. Horrible, horrible ways. He said they died professing this truth. And you may say, well, people die for a while all the time, but at the time that they die, they believe it's the truth. You know? The apostles worked with Jesus, saw him die on the cross, lived with him after he rose, went to their death declaring that truth. So they died not for a truth that they hoped for, but a truth that they were absolute eyewitnesses to. Like I said, there's no doubt, guys, and I hope that this gives you enough information to kind of, get where I'm going with this, because I am completely out of time and I apologize. But I'm telling you, You don't have to be one of those people who go, well, I hope it's true, I hope we're right, we have doubts. There's no doubt. There's no doubt. It's 100%, it's rock solid. When you step out in that world, man, and people start coming at you and you start remembering what your parents told you and what you've learned in class, if it's rock solid, when the rubber meets the road, you're going to be able to stay strong. And that doesn't mean your life's going to be perfect, but you're going to be able to survive it.